The year is 2024 and Formula One is coming back to Kyalami, just as it did in 2023, 2022, 2021, and basically every year since 1993. South Africans have been promised a Formula One race at Kyalami for over 3 decades, and for political, financial, and safety reasons, we have not got it. And that is a real shame, because Kyalami has been the crown jewel of South African racing for over 6 decades. Birthed from the passion of enthusiasts in the early 60s, Kyalami has been the home of South African Formula One, saloon car, and bike racing for so many years. So please join me as we delve into the history of this iconic track to figure out whether this new push for Formula One is legitimate and we actually are getting a Formula One race in this country again, and just maybe whether that should actually matter to us. Before I researched this video, I just assumed that Formula One had always been at Kyalami, but that is actually not the case. There had been Formula races in Mzansi since 1934 at the East London Grand Central Circuit. It was quite a cool circuit. It sort of mixed road elements and track elements together, kind of like how the Australian circuit is nowadays in Melbourne. However, if you look at a map of South Africa, you will realize that East London is not close to the major city centers of Cape Town or Johannesburg. So Gauteng enthusiasts in the early 60s decided that they needed to fix that and get a local track next to Joburg. So racing enthusiasts such as Alex Blichnout engaged apartheid government officials like the Joburg mayor, and plans were laid out for the new track, set in the outskirts of Johannesburg. The track was officially complete in 1961, and it got its name from a local piece of land which was named after the bastardization of the Zulu phrase Kyalami, which means my home. And there was real reason for fans to be excited about this new venue, specifically 2 major factors. Firstly, it was designed with spectators and fans in mind. The entire venue could host 100,000 people. And because it was on a hill, the vast majority of fans could see about 2/3 of the action at any point, instead of just seeing a single straight or a single corner. Secondly, the track was fucking fast. As you can see here, the track kind of flows like a river with very few 90-degree or over turns, meaning you can keep an incredibly high average speed. Because the cars and bikes of the era were such low grip, this made it incredibly challenging, and in the insane world of a racing driver's brain, this was perfect. The track was mainly used at the beginning for local track days and endurance races like 1,000-kilometer races and the 9 hours of Kyalami. It was also the favorite of European racers who wanted to skip their winter with the snow and the sleet and get some dry laps during our summer. However, this was all just a precursor before Kyalami caught the big fish. There had been some exhibition races before, but in 1967, the first official Formula One race occurred at Kyalami. It was won by Cooper Maserati, but far more important than who won, it proved to fans, organizers, and drivers that Kyalami was a world-class track and could host regular Formula One events. Ow! This kicked off a long and storied history between Kyalami and Formula One. We still had track days and endurance days, but South Africa hosted the top table of motorsport for decades. The greats of the sport like Lauda and Mansell and Prost all raced and won at the circuit. More importantly for local fans, Jody Scheckter won the 1975 Kyalami Grand Prix. Just a couple years before, he went on to win the entire championship with Ferrari. Everything was looking great for Kyalami, with fans and drivers extremely excited about the circuit. But whilst this may have been a dream for people involved in Formula One, the nightmare of 1980s South Africa was beginning to creep into the picture. After hundreds of years of subjugation through colonialism and official legislated race-based apartheid since 1948, it took the Western world till the 1980s to start speaking out and imposing sanctions against the apartheid government. Sanctions were being imposed across the board and at all levels of society, and by the mid-1980s, Formula One was just about the only major sporting governing body that hadn't imposed sanctions on South Africa. Thankfully, nowadays, Formula One has absolutely no history of ignoring human rights violations just to secure the bag. And they kept holding out until 1985, when the French government stepped in and banned the French teams from coming and racing in South Africa. During the race on the broadcast, James Hunt, legendary driver, spent a good couple of minutes talking about the evils of apartheid to the entire world. And after the race, the FIA decided to officially impose sanctions on South Africa, and Kyalami lost its Formula One Grand Prix. This was a major financial blow for the track, but this was absolutely not the end for Kyalami. For years and years and years, it had been a mainstay in South African saloon and endurance racing. Every time I make one of these videos and I'm talking about Group N or Group 1 or any of the iconic race cars of South Africa, I can always rely on the fact that there will be photos or footage of these amazing cars racing at Kyalami. Despite all of these events, Kyalami was still in a real financial bind, and it led to an enormous redevelopment of the track in 1988. They sold the top half of the property, which has now become valuable, and they redeveloped the track. And this meant that we lost the speed and intensity of the original track layout, especially the particularly long straight. This was a bummer for a lot of drivers because it meant that the track had sort of lost its very high speed, intense personality. But other drivers sort of argued that because it was twistier and more technical, it meant that it was more of a challenge. And this was just in time for 1990, when sanity prevailed, the apartheid era was coming to an end, and Nelson Mandela was released from prison. This was an indication to the rest of the world that South Africa was changing and they could come back into the country. That was also the year that Kyalami hosted a DTM event with their iconic M3 and 190E battle. It may have been an exhibition race, but it's still really cool. And then the big fish came back in 1992. Kyalami, with its revised straight, was the opening race of the 1992 Formula One Championships. The race was eventually won by Nigel Mansell in his Williams. Formula One came back again in 1993, featuring the likes of Prost, Senna, and Schumacher, with Prost eventually taking the win. But unfortunately, this bright spark was snuffed out for a very predictable reason: money. The promoter was arrested for fraud in 1993, which is not great, and for a reason that I don't understand economics, but I still don't fully understand, the Rand decided to tank when the ANC government came in 1994. This meant that the track was sold and Kyalami was no longer financially viable to host the Grand Prix. This led to a pretty dark time in the track's history. We still hosted things like the Superbike World Championships, but nothing really reaching the previous heights. There was a small glimmer of hope in 1998 when Bernie Ecclestone traveled down to South Africa to actually talk to Mandela to try and get another South African Grand Prix. Unfortunately, it didn't work for a very predictable reason: money. The Rand was still weak in 1998, and we had just passed a law banning the public advertising of tobacco. I don't know if you can tell by looking at these photos of these Formula One cars what that problem might have been. The track was sold again in 2004 for 42 million Rand, and it kept struggling on, hosting things like the A1 GP, which is like an open-wheeled race, kind of like Formula One, but not really. It, again, never reached its full potential. Then in 2008, there was a global financial crisis caused by the American housing market falling apart, and in 2010, the track was liquidated and put up for auction. South African racing fans were devastated because now the land had become incredibly valuable because of urban sprawl, and there was a real risk that a property developer would just buy the land, knock down the track, and turn it into luxury accommodation or a business park. There were even rumors that American and European investors were trying to buy the track and to make it unbelievably expensive and kind of out of reach of local fans. But then a miracle occurred, because on the 24th of July 2014 in Sandton, the hammer fell on Kyalami, selling for 205 million Rand.
Sold, ladies and gentlemen, at 205 to the dinner on the right-hand side. Give him a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.
The buyer was Toby Venter, a former race car driver and CEO of Porsche South Africa, and the man got the vision. This was not an investment opportunity for him. This was a man who bought the track to return it to its former glory. After the initial enormous sales price, they spent another 100 million Rand upgrading all the facilities, from the conference centers to the stands to the elongated straight, bringing back some of the insane speed of yesteryear. All of this investment and improvement to the track brought it up to FIA Grade 2, which means that it can host a number of international events. And along with this, it also hosts incredibly important events for South African motorists, like M-Fest and the Festival of Motoring. And this brings us back to the central question: is Formula One coming back to Kyalami? The recent Red Bull event brought David Coulthard and a Formula One back to the track. Gator McKenzie, the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, claimed he had a very fruitful meeting with all the F1 stakeholders. But we all just need to hold our horses just a little bit, because there are still some money-related issues that need to be solved. Remember how I said the track was now FIA Grade 2? The track needs to be FIA grade 1 to host a Formula One event. And this means even more upgrades to the track, particularly around the safety features like the Tech Pro barriers. So Fenter has said that he's willing to spend $10 million to bring the track up to grade 1 certification. So what's the problem? Why are we still questioning whether there's going to be a race at Kyalami? This is where we have to get into the nitty-gritty of how a Formula One event actually works. The key to these races are the promoters. The FIA provide the rights to the series and the track owner provides the venue, but the promoters do everything else. It's a bit like a boxing promoter. They do all the setting up and production of the event. As you can imagine, running a Formula One weekend is unbelievably expensive, and the promoters have to provide the money up front, but they also reap the profits of the event. Sometimes it's an independent company that provides the money for the promotion, and sometimes it's the government of the country that is hosting the race that provides the money. Sometimes it's a collaboration of both. The thing we know is that Toby Fenter does not want to promote the event. He's perfectly willing to host it, but he does not want to provide the money and take the risk of promoting the event. This means that some other promoter has to come in and provide that money. The South African government just does not have tens to hundreds of millions of rand to throw at an event like this, even if it'll bring in tourism. And there have been a couple of people that have come forward to promote the event, but none of them have actually put the money down. I think what will probably happen if the event happens is the government and a private promoter will work together, but we just have not seen that happen yet. So that and this new grade 1 safety thing needs to be sorted before we can have a Formula One race in this country. But this is where I ask you, do we really need it? Because I think we in South Africa have something incredibly special that we do not appreciate enough. Nestled within spitting distance of our greatest city is a track the envy of the world, a place steeped in heritage that is accessible to everyday South Africans, that has housed some of motorsport's greatest names. A track with owners that just get it. It's not an investment for them, but the continuing of a legacy that is crucial to this country's racing scene. So whilst Formula One may be coming to South Africa in 2026 or 2027 or 2028, or maybe not at all, I don't think that should be the deciding factor for Kyalami. We should appreciate how special this place is. In Kyalami, our home.